Hi, Kusaland here. I have created this channel purely to bring you this one theory that I believe will bring a new era to the One Piece theory community. For those who end up watching this video to the end, thank you. I honestly don't know if anyone will even watch this, but I felt that I had an obligation to at least put this out there. If you believe that a great theory can come from anyone and anywhere, I really hope that you stick around to watch this video. In this video, I'm going to share a thought process with you which I believe is genuinely going to blow your mind. By the end of this video, your mind is going to be flipped so many times that you will need a moment to piece it all together again. You're going to hear a lot of theories with hard evidence that you've never even heard of, and then I'm going to end it all with a don by revealing the single piece of information that will tie it all together into a neat bow. By the end, you will realize that Oda hasn't been random or whimsical at all. In fact, he has been meticulously weaving this idea into his story from the very first volume. This one idea is going to explain and connect so many of the seemingly random details in One Piece. It's literally going to connect everything. Everything, of course, except for Gaimon. He is still a complete enigma to me. I just can't seem to figure him out. So, sit down, get comfy, and treat yourself to the most incredible idea that you will have heard in a long time.
Treat yourself. It's the best day of the year. The best day of the year!
If you end up enjoying this video, please spread the love by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with your nakama who have consented to being spoiled. So we all know that One Piece is a story about fictional pirates, yes? Trust me, it gets better. Well, what if I told you that One Piece is not just a story about pirates? One Piece is also a story about something else entirely. Funny thing is, Oda-sensei hasn't even bothered to hide this fact at all. He's been spelling it out to us from the very first volume of the story. So here we go. One Piece is a story about pirates, but secondly, One Piece is a story about Christmas. That's right, One Piece is undoubtedly a story about Christmas. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, Kusaland, if Christmas is actually an important part of One Piece, shouldn't we see Christmas themes within the members of the Straw Hats, for example? After all, they are the main protagonists of the story. To this, I say, let's take another look. Luffy is Joyboy, who better in the story is suited to embody Santa Claus and bring joy to the people of the world. Luffy's Gear 5, which turns him into an all-white warrior, is reminiscent of a white Christmas. Both Luffy without the Gear 5 and Zoro bears the other colours of Christmas. And I guess Sanji too, since gold is another Christmas colour. Zoro's scar post-time skip is in the shape of a cross, and we even see him on a cross in his introduction. The cross, which ties to Jesus, is also a wordplay on the Japanese word for Santa Claus, which is Santa Kurosu. Kurosu being the wordplay for cross. His descendant's family name, Shimotsuki, means frost moon in kanji. The name Zoro is derived from the three wise men, or the Magi, who heralded the baby Jesus. These three men were priests, but not just any priests. They were Zoroastrian priests. Shout out to that One Piece talk. If you know, you know. Perhaps all three of Zoro's swords will represent kings by the end of the story, since we already have Enma, which represents the king of hell. Ame no Habakiri, with its reference to Susanoo, comes to mind as a potentially kingly sword. One of Nami's emblems is the mandarin, which is a type of orange. Oranges were placed in stockings as gifts during Christmas, as they were affordable luxuries that symbolize gifts of God. We also shouldn't forget that Nami's introduction was in Orangetown. Sanji, which could be read as 3 o'clock in Japanese, is a reference to the 60s Christmas carol Past 3 o'clock. It could also be a reference to Miracles on 34th Street, a Christmas film from the 40s, 34 in Goroase being Sanji. Being the chef of the ship, we should quickly mention how food and feasting is an important aspect of Christmas also.
You're right. Nothing more important than food.
Usopp symbolizes the miracle on Christmas and the child wishing for those miracles, his key word being wish. His weapon of choice is a slingshot, a weapon in the shape of a wishbone. His attacks end in the word boshi, meaning stars, relating to when you wish upon a star. And since we're on the topic of wishing upon stars, his character design is clearly based on Pinocchio, the Disney classic. I guess his lies are also tied to the sort of lies that you make in order to bring people joy. Like how Usopp lies to Kaya and his mum to bring them joy and to make them feel better, parents lie to their kids about Santa Claus to bring them joy. Next we have Chopper. He's an obvious one since he's a blue-nosed reindeer instead of Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, and was introduced to us in Drum Island, where Christmas themes are everywhere. But did you notice that Rumble Balls are a wordplay on Bum Balls, the delicious treat that goes perfectly with both a pirate and Christmas story like One Piece? Chopper has always been a mascot character of One Piece, and it makes so much more sense when we realize that One Piece is also a Christmas story. And as a side note, we actually have at least 2 other characters in the story who also take inspiration from Santa's reindeers and act as a sort of counterpart to Chopper, the first being Buggy the Clown. The name Buggy historically means vehicle with wheels that is horse-drawn like a sleigh. Unlike Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, who was able to guide Santa through the dark, Buggy the Red-Nosed Clown got sick before going to Laughdale and was unable to guide his captain to their destination. FYI, I find it interesting that Buggy was the only known devil fruit user of the crew. I wonder if devil fruits will be intrinsically tied to Laughdale. The second counterpart to Chopper is Caribou. Yeah, that Caribou, that slimy creep who's been overstaying his welcome in the story. Well, Caribou is another word for a reindeer, and I mean, check out his ship. Yeah, we've been wondering who Caribou's boss was, but with this it becomes a possibility that his boss is a certain pirate who represents an evil Santa. Alright, so let's get back to the Straw Hats. Up next is another Christmas related animal, the robin. That's right, the Straw Hats archaeologist is based on none other than a Christmas bird. And let's not forget that Nico, or rather Nico Nico, means to smile in Japanese. It can also be derived from Saint Nicholas, which in katakana is Sento Nicolasu. Frankie's name comes from frankincense, one of the gifts given to baby Jesus by the 3 wise men. And let's not forget that both Frankie and the Sunny run on cola. Don't tell me you've forgotten those iconic Coca-Cola ads during Christmas dating back all the way to the 20s. Can I also point out for a moment that Frankie post-time skip just looks like a robot toy straight from the 90s, like especially General Frankie. And you know how Frankie had 37 written on his body? Well, 3 in Japanese is sun, and 7 can actually be written to look like the katakana for ta, so here you get sun ta. But this one, maybe a stretch. Moving on, Brook and his laugh is a syllable away from Saint Nick's very own iconic laugh. Ho ho ho, yo ho ho. Again, Oda has found a perfect link that connects both pirates and Christmas. Brook's weapon is a weapon in the shape of a cane, and like candy canes, with its peppermint flavor, it has a chilling effect. Oh, and please tell me you haven't missed Brook's link to Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King himself. Oda has also claimed in an interview that The Nightmare Before Christmas is one of his favorite films. Being the musician of the crew and seeing as music is both a major aspect of One Piece, pirates and Christmas, I'd also like to come back to Brook a little later in the video since he has an even bigger part to play. My favorite example though is Jinbei, since it's such a fun pun. You ever wonder why Jinbei's name in English is officially spelt this way and not like this, or this? Jinbei, the helmsman of the Straw Hat Pirates, gets his name from the 1957 Christmas carol Jingle Bell Rock by, wait for it, Bobby Helms. I mean, look at Jinbei's getup in Mono. He's literally dressed like a Christmas bell. Seriously, this guy is a madman when it comes to puns. Oh, yeah, and I did notice that the word rock as in rocks is also in the name. That's because if you write Jingle Bell Rock in Japanese, you get this. Now, if you take ji, be, and ku, you get jibeku. And then if you combine it with roku, you get rokujibeku. Finally, both old and the current ships of the Straw Hats have references to Christmas, with Merry having the sheep head, and the Merry as in Merry Christmas. With the Thousand Sunny, when you look at the lion head, which is obviously another reference to Jesus, then you also notice that it actually looks like a star. So, the ship itself represents a Christmas tree, and the lion star figurehead is its star topper. Which reminds me, I almost forgot to mention that Chopper's name is Tony Chopper, as in topper. So you see, even a cursory look at the Straw Hats gives you more than enough evidence of what I'm trying to illustrate here. Christmas ties a lot of the seemingly random elements of One Piece. Alright, shall I continue? A Christmas ham is a quintessential dish on Christmas Day. You know the cut of meat used for this delicious goodness? The shank. I guess Blackbeard just wanted to cover the ham. And while we're talking about Blackbeard, he is pretty much Santa Claus if Santa Claus wore black instead of red and was a complete a-hole. In Japan, they even have a character called Kuroi Santa, or Black Santa, who goes around doing the opposite of the typical Santa. Japanese parents often use Black Santa as a way to get children to behave. And you know what? It probably became a thing because the Japanese in general are like Oda in that they really do like puns. As mentioned earlier, Claus is Kurosu in Japanese, and Kuro simply means black. The name for Jesus in Japanese is Yesu, like this. Swap a couple letters around and you get Yesu. Gold is very much a Christmas symbol as it's one of the gifts from the 3 wise men. Therefore, both the color gold and the Pirate King Goldie Roger is quintessential to Christmas. Fig and garland makes Figgerland. The Holy Nights or God's Nights can be linked to the 1843 Christmas song O Holy Night, with O means king in Japanese. This makes me think that there will be 12 Holy Nights like the 12 Holy Nights of Christmas. It would also fit with the 12 disciples of Jesus, I guess. Oh, and just as an FYI, notice how Garland symbolizes the moon with his hairstyle from the side? But from the front, his hair would probably look like a star. Since stars are a common emblem of Christmas, you know, with the Star of Bethlehem and all that, it's quite fitting. Stars are also placed as toppers for Christmas, as mentioned before, which is perfect for Garland as he is the head of the Holy Nights. Father Christmas is one of the dozen names that Santa Claus goes by. A character who is a father to all his crew members and even has a great white beard is none other than the former Yonko, Edward Newgate. Silver's rally is silver, ray, and sleigh. Law in katakana is law, meaning wax, a wordplay on the Christmas emblem of candles. Mr. 3 also represents this iconic Christmas item. Chestnuts have been a staple for Christmas for over 200 years. In Japan, Merry Christmas is abbreviated to Meri Kuri, kuri having another meaning of chestnuts. Nolan's name in Japanese can also have a su added to it, making his name Monte Branco Snowlando, Mont Blanc Snowland, as in White Mountain, Snowland. And if Nolan represents a white mountain, it's only fitting that Calgara is a warrior of red. Charlotte Linden, aka Big Mom, represents a bell in that Lin Lin is the onomatopoeia for the sound of a bell in Japanese. Charlotte, on the other hand, could be a reference to Queen Charlotte, Britain's longest-serving queen consort. Queen Charlotte was born and raised in Germany, where a lot of modern Christmas traditions originated from. When she married King George III, she was the first to bring Christmas trees to England. Later on, Queen Victoria and her German cousin/husband, Prince Albert, managed to popularize the Christmas trees in England. Lily was also royalty. A royal lily is the name of this flower. It also goes by the name of Christmas lily. Luffy and Blackbeard fight over a cherry pie and a beverage. This could represent the different roles they have yet to play in the Christmas story. The 6 major families of Wano all have the kanji for moon in their names except for the Kurozumi clan, whose name translates to black charcoal. Yep, someone's clearly made the naughty list. There are multiple symbolisms of immortality in Christmas. Evergreens, garlands, and Saint Nick himself. I'm sure that many of you already know that the ideas of immortality is starting to be foreshadowed in the story, with Imu and the Gorosei who don't seem to age, and Roger who also talks about the themes of being immortalized. Now, I've already mentioned that reindeers and robins were Christmas animals, but there are also a few other Christmas animals that are referenced in One Piece. There's camels that the Magi rode on, donkeys, and oxes, who are typically depicted in the nativity scenes, and sheep and goats, which I'll talk about later in the video. In terms of other birds other than the robin, there are turtle doves, and they are referenced in the Christmas song, The 12 Days of Christmas. Penguins and polar bears are associated with Christmas also, even though they are from the South Pole, not the North Pole. So, what creatures do live on the North Pole, you might ask? Well, there are a few, but notably the Arctic fox. Yamato's devil fruit, the Inu Inu no Mi model Okuchi no Makami, suddenly makes a lot of sense. In Albert, the home of the giants, there is an event called the Winter Solstice, a festival held to celebrate the death and rebirth of the sun. In Scandinavia, the Germanic people, including the Norse, celebrated Yule, the winter solstice. Yule is recognized as the origin of Christmas, and it was a celebration of the return of the sun. That's right, Albos Festival and our world's Yule both celebrated the return of the sun. Doesn't that remind you of the dawn of the world to you? The winter months was a time of celebration since they slaughtered the cattle to save on feed, so there was plenty of meat. They'd also party with lots of booze, and they'd celebrate hard, like for days and days. The revelry, a reference to the revelry, a lively and noisy festivity usually involving drinks and food, and very much a word that is often used to describe Christmas gatherings. The Shandorian Golden Belfry Bell, otherwise known as the Light of Shandora, is found at the top of the giant jack, so again an imagery of a Christmas tree and a star topper. And speaking of bells, there is also the ox bell, the sacred bell that is rung at the end of the year to give thanks to the previous year. And let's not forget that the ox, as mentioned, is a Christmas animal. We ring bells throughout Christmas to announce the arrival of the season and to proclaim the birth of Christ. The ringing of bells can be traced back to the pagan winter celebrations. During those times, bells were used to scare away evil spirits at night. It suddenly makes sense why One Piece has important references to bells. The German Yule log is a specifically selected log that is burnt on a hearth during the festivities. The lighting of the Yule also symbolizes the birth of Jesus. Logtown and the log post could be a word play on the word log. Now let's talk about the island we associate most to Christmas, Drum Island, where we meet our wonderful Dr. Chopper. It's also the island we find out about Ace, Blackbeard, and the Will of D for the first time. We all know the obvious links to Christmas like Dr. Kureha and his sled, Wapo who is basically an a-hole Santa with his Buck factory and toys he makes later in the chapter covers. There's also Dalton, who ate the ox fruit. We also see Dr. Hiro coming into people's homes through the chimneys, and so on and so forth. There's also another huge connection to Christmas on this island, but I will go over that a little later. Savoldi Archipelago is based on an island called Christmas Island located in the Indian Ocean. Without getting into too much details of the island itself, the capital of this island is named Flying Fish Cove, and there's even an ancient mangrove forest there. Dressrosa references multiple Christmas stories including The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, The Steadfast Tin Soldier, a story about a one-legged tin soldier, and The Elves and the Shoemaker. The Smile Factory that uses the tontatas as a slave to create artificial devil fruits is a twisted take on Santa's workshop. We also see that Sugar has filled the country with people that she has turned into old-school toys. The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus is a children's book written in 1902. In the story, Santa lives in a place called Laughing Valley. I don't know, maybe something, maybe not, but also Santa gets granted immortality at the end of this book apparently. And now, for something slightly obscure relating to the moon. Christmas Eve, 1968. Millions around the world were tuned in as the Apollo 8 astronauts became the first humans to orbit the moon. As the people on Earth watched and listened around their TVs, the astronauts beamed back images of the moon and the Earth and took turns to read from the Book of Genesis. In an interview, one of the astronauts, Lovell, stated that the first 10 verses of the Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions. After circling the moon 10 times on Christmas Eve, it was time to go home. On Christmas morning, Mission Control waited anxiously for the astronauts to radio in, with an all green that Apollo 8's engine burn to leave the lunar orbit had worked. They finally got confirmation when Lovell radioed in and said, "Roger, please be informed, there is a Santa Claus." See, I don't know about you, but the Apollo 8 mission to me ties so much to the romance of adventure. And finally, since this video is about Christmas, I bet many of you are wondering which location ODE has made to be the North Pole. After all, Santa's workshop and home is there. Also, if I'm claiming that Joyboy represents Santa Claus, that would mean that finding the North Pole in the story should show us where Joyboy lived at some point in the Void Century. I'll give you a clue. This is a map of the North Pole, imagined by a Flemish cartographer, Gerardus Mercator, drawn in 1595. Does this remind you of anything? To me, the shape reminds me of Enies Lobby. It's also interesting that Enies Lobby also goes by Judicial Island, the Japanese name for it being Shiho no Shima. And this is interesting because this map drawn by Gerardus looks like it has 4 rivers, each pointing to a cardinal direction, the north, south, west and east. Shiho, meaning judicial, can also be a wordplay in Japanese to mean 4 directions. This also ties into the world government symbol, which is a cross. As I mentioned earlier, the word cross can be a wordplay on kurosu, as in Santa Claus. I'm starting to wonder if the world government just stole the flag of the people they defeated in the 4th century? Enies Lobby in Japanese, when romanized, is Enies Lobby. Does any of you remember what the Japanese word for Jesus is? It's Iesu. Again, a reference of Jesus, who I believe is a figure in One Piece that crosses over with Santa Claus. Enies Lobby is also called the Hirujima, meaning afternoon island, and Fuyajima, the never night island, as it is always daytime there. The Arctic, or the North Pole, in our world is called the land of the midnight sun, because for half of the year in summer, the sun never sets. We should also point out that if we are to believe that Enies Lobby was Joyboy's home, it is a real possibility that Joyboy's devil fruit ability has permanently changed this island to never go dark. After all, Nika is the sun god. We have seen examples of this kind of effect on an environment in Punk Hazard, for example, with Aokiji and Akainu. Finally, do you all remember the method in which Luffy and his nakama got to Enies Lobby? It was the sea train. There is a 1985 children's picture book called The Polar Express. There is an animated film adaptation of this story, which you may have heard of, starring Tom Hanks. Basically, spoiler alert, the Polar Express was a train that took a bunch of kids to the North Pole where they met Santa. So basically, just like in the Polar Express, Luffy and his nakama rode on the sea train, the Rocket Man, to get to Enies Lobby, aka the North Pole. We even had Sodom and Gomorrah attached to Rocket Man, pulling the Frankie family's ship, which ties into Santa and his sleigh. Let's look to the Greeks for more connections between Enies Lobby and the North Pole. In Greek mythology, Hyperboreans were mythical giants who lived in the furthest north of the world. The name means beyond Boreas, Boreas being the god of the north wind. Despite the north being a frigid part of the world, the Hyperboreans lived in a sunny and temperate land. In fact, it was quote-unquote an earthly paradise of eternal youth and abundance. However, it was so tricky to get to that only semi-divine heroes like Hercules was ever capable of visiting it. It is said that the sun god Apollo would spend the winters there amongst the Hyperboreans. They were even said to have worshipped Apollo and had a temple dedicated to him. So, a whole lot of keywords jump out at me there. The Hyperboreans were mythical giants. The race in One Piece that immediately pops into mind are the ancient giants. Then we see that the land these giants lived in was a paradise, which is the name of the first half of the Grand Line, which Enies Lobby is located in. Then there's talks about eternal youth, which ties to the endgame of One Piece. The semi-divine heroes, who were the only ones capable of reaching the land, are clearly people like Luffy and Roger. Apollo, of course, is the One Piece equivalent of Nika and Joyboy, and the Temple of the Sun God makes me think of Shandora, the city of gold, because gold typically symbolizes the sun. So, what if Enies Lobby was the North Pole in One Piece during the 4th century? In the current world map of the One Piece world, that doesn't really make sense, but maybe there was a shift in the rotation of the Earth or something, which could cause Enies Lobby to no longer be at the North Pole? And what if, like the Hyperboreans who were in fact mythical giants, Enies Lobby originally belonged to the ancient giants, and they're mixed race descendants like the Oni, and they worship the sun god Nika? You know, I think it would make sense too if Enies Lobby represented the sun because of Joyboy, since when we look at the other two facilities connected to the Tarai current, we see that Marineford is represented as the moon. What does Impel Down represent to balance the sun and moon? I guess it would fit better if we look at it more like this. Enies Lobby represented the sun and sky, Marineford represented the sea and the moon, and Impel Down represents the earth and the underworld. I bet that some of you are starting to think that this sounds a lot like the stories of the three gods, or rather the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, in Greek mythology, or Amaterasu, Tsukiyomi, and Susanoo, the three siblings in Japanese mythology. The Tarai currents suddenly looks like a metaphor for the balance between the three powers, doesn't it? So let's indulge this train of thought for a moment. What if Joyboy had two brothers? But unlike Luffy, who has two brothers that were not by blood, what if Joyboy had two brothers that were his blood brothers? Maybe they were even triplets. Alright, so I think it's time I reveal Joyboy's name. So I believe that Joyboy's name was Lamu. To keep things simple from now on in the video, let's just say that whenever I say Lamu, I'm talking about Joyboy. Alright, so we have Lamu, and his two brothers' names were Taimu and, wait for it, Imu. That's right, and what if the Tarai Currents was an acronym for the initials of the three brothers, as in Ta, La, I? What's more, I'm theorizing that Joyboy was a brother to Imu, as in this Imu, and on top of that, there was a third brother called Taimu. So their full names would be NERONA Taimu, NERONA D Lamu, and NERONA Imu. I only gave Lamu as in Joyboy the D initial, as I believe the D is only tied to Lamu. The three brothers did not see eye to eye, I don't think. Some of you may already know this, but the family name Nerona, when written as katakana, can form the elements that make up the kanji for kami, as in God. Taimu is a wordplay on time and time, which is the same when written in katakana. The idea here being that Taimu was the god of time. The time is just linked to a herb that is used in Christmas dishes and works well with other plant-based One Piece character names like Clover, Basil Hawkins, Dr. Kureha, Crocus, and Ingo. I believe that Taimu may have been an engineer and an inventor like Frankie and Vegapunk. Lamu, as in Joyboy, is a wordplay on a lamb, rum, Lamu, which is an island in Kenya, and I also think it's a homage to the character called Lamu from Urusei Yatsura, a character created by Rumiko Takahashi sensei. In case you don't know, Rumiko, whose name inspired this character's name, is the most successful female manga artist and is the mastermind behind mangas such as Ranma 1/2 and Inuyasha. Finally, when you add D to Lamu's name, we get Doramu, as in drum. Suddenly we get a whole new meaning to the epithet of drums of liberation, Kaiho no Doramu. I also believe that Lamu was a musician. Finally, we have Imu, most likely the eldest of the three. Most of you already know about how the katakana for Imu can form the elements for the kanji for Buddha, or that Imu in reverse reads as Umi, the ocean. What you may not know though, is that Imu in Japanese can also mean doctor. Therefore, I think that it would be super interesting if Imu was indeed a doctor at one point. You may have a little concern right now, since you may know that the mu in Imu means void. Now, a void is certainly not a fitting theme for someone like Joyboy, right? Well, let me clear some things for you. The kanji for void, as in mu, can indeed be used for negative words like muri, meaning impossible and unreasonable, or muimi, which means meaningless, and mu by itself, which does in fact mean nothingness and void. However, mu is also used in words like mugen and musu, meaning infinite and countless. Therefore, the meaning of mu for the three brothers could be something like this. The mu for Taimu, the god of time, is musu, meaning innumerable or countless. What if Taimu, who had dominion over time, could access countless parallel universes? The mu for Lamu, the god of drums, and the embodiment of sun god Nika is mugen, as in infinite. This is the infinite possibilities given to those that are freed and liberated by him. And finally, the mu for Emu, the god of the ocean and void, is simply mu. I believe this is a reference to how even in our world, 3.5 billion years ago, life started from nothingness in the ocean. This idea really excites me because you could have a lot of fun with how the three brothers see the same thing as being entirely different. Perhaps Taimu uses his powers for being able to access different timelines for his own gains. After all, if you had that kind of power, wouldn't it be tempting to change the fates to your advantage? Maybe Lamu uses his powers to give those around him endless possibilities, like the sun whose rays gives energy to all living things. Lamu made it his mission to raise others up. And finally, Emu. I mentioned that Emu means doctor. I sense a certain despair from this character. Perhaps he used to believe that he could save others and cure the world, but something traumatic happened to him, and now he believes that everything is pointless, or that the people are a disease that needs to be cured, and maybe he was possessed by a spirit of some kind. He doesn't even think twice anymore about turning others into mu, nothingness. One extra thing I came across in terms of Lamu was semla. It was a treat that was eaten in Elbaf before the winter solstice to sustain the body during the fasting. It's the thing that Big Mum just would not stop talking about. Well, semla in Japanese is written as semura. If you flip the characters, you get Lamu-se, which sounds very similar to Saint Lamu. I don't think that Oda would have been intentional with this one though, but then again, Oda is the GOAT, so who knows. Alright, let's move on. So we know because Luffy really wanted a musician, and because he is the drum of liberation, that music is a key theme in One Piece. I've already talked about Jingle Bell Rock and Oh Holy Night as being connected to One Piece, but here's a few more. The Little Drummer Boy is about a poor boy who has nothing to present as a gift to baby Jesus, so he plays his drum instead of giving a material gift. In the lyrics, baby Jesus smiles at him as the drummer boy does his best to play. The name of the song at least reminds me of Joyboy, and the story may tie to the One Piece itself, hopefully not in the form of the friends we made along the way. Silent Night, Holy Night, or simply known as Silent Night, is a German carol which I'm sure we've all heard at least once before. It's even declared an intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. It was first composed and performed in 1818. As soon as I thought of this song, I couldn't help but think of this scene with Corazon. Law's silent screams on a white snowy night, and Corazon who thought of Law till his last breath. And now this final song has to do with Empress Boa Hancock. She shares her name with a South Korean pop star who goes by the name of Boa, otherwise known as the Queen of K-pop. Her ability to sing in Korean, English, Japanese, and Mandarin has made her a success outside of Korean borders. Her Christmas song, Merikuri, which she recorded in Japanese, did incredibly well in the charts and has become one of the staples of Christmas in Japan. What is significant about her though is that Boa is known as the first South Korean pop star to make it into the Japanese market since the fall of borders that restricted the import and export of entertainment between the countries since World War II. She is also the only overseas artist with 3 albums that have sold more than 1 million copies in Japan. As I will discuss further in the video, One Piece at its core is about the connection of people, the mixing and sharing of the cultures, and the removal of both the physical and mental barriers that separate us. In those regards, Boa is a shining beacon of this idea in our world. Also, in case you didn't know, the word for Korea in the Korean language is Hanguk. Therefore, Boa Hancock is Boa of Hanguk. So, I think I may know what the name of the Great Kingdom was. To explain what the name of the kingdom was though, I first need to bring up a new theory, the details of which will have to be in a separate video about Nika. The theory goes like this. Nika at some point became a space pirate. He traveled through our solar system and learned from the different people of the planets he visited. Along the way, the people and the creatures of these planets joined him as nakama. His adventures were similar to Luffy's, who traveled from island to island, but instead Nika traveled from planet to planet. After his adventure, Nika and his people made base on the moon. However, eventually, Nika decided to finally return to Earth, and he came back with most of his nakama. Nika and his people shared their culture, technology, and knowledge with the people of the world. The collective culture on Earth began to develop at an incredible pace as a result of this mixing pot. The mingling of all the different races further increased the diversity of the races, and the planet flourished. But one day, one of the races, the people of Jupiter in fact, betrayed Nika. The Jovians decided that humans were an inferior species, undeserving of the lands that they occupied. The Jovian king and his followers started pillaging and claiming the land for themselves. A great war took place between Nika the sun god and the king of Jupiter. The rest of the story, like how Nika came to be and how Nika became a space pirate, has to be left for another video. But what we can take from this initial headcanon is this. At some point in the history of the planet, people from other planets arrived on Earth, bringing with them their culture, technology, and knowledge. The races that came to Earth with Nika were the Mercurians of Mercury, now known as Fishmen, the Venusians of Venus, now known as Amatsuki, the Skypians, and the women of Amazon Lily, the Martians of Mars, now known as the Lunarians, Jovians of Jupiter, now known as the Ancient Giants, the Saturnians of Saturn, now known as Giants, Uranians of Uranus, now known as Birkins, Neptunians of Neptune, now known as Merfolk, Plutonians of Pluto, now known as Dwarves, and the Lunarians of the Moon, now known as Shandians and the Minks. Which leads me to my theory about the Vikings and the three great kings. Fast forward to Joyboy's time now. I believe that during his era before the formation of the Great Kingdom, Earth was riddled with slavery. Slavery specifically of anyone with Jovian blood. Anyone with horns were hunted down and enslaved, without question. In such a time, 6 kings came to be recognized, and they went by the title of the Vikings, or the 6 kings. Of the 6, one of the kings with the epithet of King Saturn took to the seas to free slaves. His name was NERONA D, the king of the giants, a former slave himself, and the future king of the Great Kingdom.
Wow, you have a lot of names.
Although Lamu was not a full-blooded giant, and was actually part ancient giant, the previous king Yudoru and the other giants accepted Lamu as their king. Since Lamu and his giants traveled the seas, freeing and bringing ancient giants and their mixed descendants of the Oni aboard their ship, the members of the ship all wore helmets with horns on them to prevent the former slaves from becoming a target. This is very much the same sort of tactic used by the sun pirates who changed the hooves of the soaring dragon into a sun emblem. Eventually, Lamu formed alliances with the 5 other kings, who were all inspired by Lamu and his blinding energy. Eventually, the whole alliance came to be recognized with the horns that they all wore, and they all sailed the seas to free as many slaves as they possibly could. Finally, the 3 great kings, Poseidon, Pluton, and Uranus, also joined the alliance. Eventually though, the alliance decided that the Jovians needed a permanent home. For fear of the government coming to claim back these former slaves, Lamu and his people made base in a location as far north as they possibly could, and found land for the Jovians. The people of the alliance helped Lamu and the Jovians to set up, and Lamu decided to stay with the Jovians as their leader. Yudoru, the previous leader, became King Saturn again, and the kings of the alliances left to go back to their home countries. This, however, would not be the last time that Lamu and the Jovians would see the other kings though, for they would frequently come back with supplies, and to trade, and to have a jolly good time partying. They had incredible banquets that lasted days. Soon the new kingdom became a hub of all the ships that would come and go, and all sorts of people began living on the island. The kingdom truly began to grow. It eventually became so grand that in the current timeline, it is known as the Great Kingdom, or Kyōdaina Okoku, but during Lamu's time, it was known by another name. In the 1947 film The Miracle on 34th Street, starring Maureen O'Hara, there is a famous quote that goes like this. "Do you know what the imagination is?" "Oh sure, that's when you see things but they're not really there." "Well, that can be caused by other things too." "No, to me the imagination is a place all by itself, a separate country. Now you've heard of the French nation, the British nation. Well, this is the imagination. It's a wonderful place. How would you like to be able to make snowballs in the summertime, or drive a great big bus right down 5th Avenue? How would you like to have a ship all to yourself that makes daily trips to China and Australia? It's very simple, of course. It takes practice. Now the first thing you've got to learn is how to pretend. So you see, my belief is that the Great Kingdom was called Imagination, or the Great Imagination. Fitting, I think, because the imagination is what Luffy's Nika fruit is all about. Fitting also because the idea of imagination is a recurring and important theme in One Piece. I think that like in Nika's time where the different races shared their cultures with one another and advanced their civilization, I believe that Lamu's nation also did the same. By sharing and combining their strength and knowledge through trade and giving, they became only limited by their imagination. They developed new technology and inventions and truly flourished as a utopia. In the next section, I will talk about the Great Imagination's greatest invention, their magnum opus which they gifted to the world. We all know that Christmas time for kids means one thing, gifts. During the 18th century, wooden toys were popular. Some of the most popular and best-selling Christmas toys in more recent history were Star Wars toys, Transformer toys, Power Ranger toys, Mr. Potato Head, Operation, Smurfs, Slinkies, and the Rubik Cubes. Fun fact, there are 30 poneglyphs. If you don't count the 4 rogue poneglyphs, you have 26 cubes, the exact number of cubes in the Rubik's Cube. It would be interesting, I thought, if there was a puzzle element to the poneglyphs that when pieced together correctly reads a completely new message. In Greek mythology, Prometheus is credited for stealing fire from the gods and gifting it to humanity in the form of technology, knowledge, and civilization. Prometheus was known for his intelligence and for being a champion of mankind.
Champion?
And I believe that in the One Piece world, there was also a gift that was given to humanity to allow them to progress their civilization and to liberate them from tyranny. And I believe that Lamu, our Joyboy, was the one to gift humanity with this gift. This of course would tie in with my theory that Joyboy is Santa Claus, because what would Santa Claus be without his white sack of gifts? I think most of you have already guessed it at this point. The gift that I'm talking about is of course devil fruits. In the story of Santa Claus, Christmas elves live with Santa Claus at the North Pole. They make toys in the workshop, as Santa Claus cannot work alone. The dwarves of the Tontada tribe is the most obvious answer to fill the shoes of the Santa's elves in One Piece. And of course, the location of the workshop would be Annie's lobby, which I'm proposing to be the North Pole. This would be fitting also, since the first time in the story we see anyone eating the devil fruits since Luffy in the first chapter is at Annie's lobby when Kaku and Khalifa eat their fruits. Just as we've seen in the underground Smile Factory, Tontata are very capable of growing any plants, including devil fruits. I believe that the Great Imagination's magnum opus, their crowning achievement, was the development of a tree which could bear devil fruits. Without the help, technology, and knowledge from the allied races, none of it would have been possible. What I imagine is this. The center of the workshop, which for this video we'll call the Imaginarium, was full of amazing inventions, maybe similar to Vegapunk's lab on Egghead, but even more whimsical. At the center of all the chaos and excitement was a giant tree. The giant tree was fully decorated with shiny glowing fruits that were growing from the tree. The fruits were colorful and came in every color of the rainbow. Visually, obviously the fruits looked like baubles on a Christmas tree, which it's no wonder they don't taste so good. The tree somehow harnessed the dreams, wishes, and imaginations of the people in the world. So now we have the gift. Fruits from a tree that gives people special powers. But a gift is not a gift unless it is delivered and given. And how do we go about delivering all of these fruits to the whole world in record time? So this is where we move on to Santa's magical sleigh pulled by his flying reindeers, or the One Piece equivalent of it at least. See, I believe there would have been at least 3 sleighs used by Lamu, our Santa Claus figure, and these sleighs, I believe, were pulled by dragons instead of reindeers. The water dragon, the ground dragon, and the sky dragon. Yes, dragons. I admit it, it doesn't have much to do with Christmas, but One Piece is first and foremost a story about pirates, and both Japanese and Norse mythology has recurring themes of dragons. And let's just say that since Yule is a Norse celebration, it counts for Christmas too, okay? Also, dragons are awesome, so stop complaining. Anyway, 3 dragons pulling 3 sleighs, and if we look to the good old Greeks for inspiration, I think that we can think of these sleighs as being more like chariots, ridden by the gods. And how fitting that would be in this case, because I believe that the figures riding these 3 sleighs, you guessed it, are the 3 great kings, Poseidon, Pluton, and Uranus. If we follow this train of thought, we know that Poseidon is a mermaid, and the most likely chariot is the Noah pulled by the Sea Kings. Sea Kings are ginormous monsters that are often reptilian in nature, hence I think that they can be considered water dragons. Now, how they would have traveled quickly to the different parts of the world is by traveling through calm belts, and what's more, navigating through the White Strom, otherwise known as the Shiroiryu, White Dragon in Japanese. If you remember, the White Strom is an underwater whirlpool. Rumors have it that ships that enter the White Strom will be discovered days later in waters impossibly far removed from their original location. which Luffy perfectly describes as a warp zone. What better way to deliver gifts to people in record time through this underwater highway? Next is Pluton, which I have narrowed down to being the dwarves of the Tontatas, and here's some reasons why. Pluton the planet is considered a dwarf planet, and in this story we have people who call themselves dwarves. Pluton is the god of the underworld, and Tontatas have heavy associations to the underground. The ancient Greeks saw mushrooms as a symbol of Pluto, of the underworld and afterlife, fitting since mushrooms often grow on decomposing things. I also personally like the idea that by adding Plu in front of Tontata, you get Plutontata. I believe that the Tontatas rode a giant mole.
Mole, 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 mole.
An idea that I've seen circulating around and agree with. If you have watched any of these theories regarding it, you would have heard that the word for mole in kanji is written as ground dragon. An added bonus for me is that the word mole, written in katakana as moru, actually means tinsels in Japanese. Plus, a mole who digs and lives underground is a perfect companion to the Tontatas who also live underground. The chariot for Pluton, I think, could be a Wano-style full-body kabuto armor, which would look absolutely badass. Maybe the design will make the mole look even more like a Grand Dragon.
Not like this.
In keeping with the 90s Toys vibes, the armor could also take inspiration from something like Power Rangers Samurai, since the Tiger Drill Megazord in the show looks like this. Imagine the looks on the shiny-eyed trio and the Tontatas when they see this bad boy. Moles would also have been the perfect creatures, as seen in the chapter covers, to travel straight through the ground to their delivery destinations. Again, another perfect highway. Uranus, I'm guessing, would be a Birkin. They have the largest white wings of the races we've seen so far, and it's the location where Enel, the man with the biggest god complex, comes from. The fact that it's also still shrouded in so many mysteries makes it the most suspicious. I think also the chariot of Uranus could be a gigantic version of the Arc Maxim, but pulled by Eastern-style dragons, who can create flame clouds like Kaido and Momo's dragon forms. Dragons, naturally being one of the fastest flyers in the world of One Piece, would be the perfect chariot pullers for traveling through the air at top speeds. And if that wasn't enough, I believe that this giant Arc Maxim had Binks using Electrode to power up the ship, and had ancient giants pulling the oars. Now, before we move on to the next section, a mini theory on this last comment about the ancient giants pulling the oars. I believe that Oars from Thriller Bark and Oars Jr. are descendants of the King of the Jovians from Joyboy's era. I believe their task was to pull the oars of a giant flying ship, a ship so gigantic that it was considered a continent. This is how I believe that Oars got his epithet of the continent puller, because if you didn't know, an oar is something that is pulled. An alternative, darker version is that the name Oars could be a derogatory name for the ancient giant slaves who were forced to row giant ships the size of continents. This version would reflect our world's history a lot more, in that a galley slave were slaves who were forced to row in a galley, which was a type of ship that relies on oars to get anywhere. There were even cases of pirates using galley slaves from the 16th to the 19th century. There's actually more to talk about in regards to the dark history of both Christmas and pirates later in the video. Although Joyboy and his people were not evil, by losing the war during the Void Century, they ended up being labelled as the Devils. Anyone or anything associated with Joyboy was also labelled as such. Oda is constantly challenging the idea of what is good or evil in One Piece, and is often flipping stereotypes of well-known stories and concepts. In human history, goats and sheep actually illustrate this idea really well. Both animals were very important animals during prehistory. They were both associated with animals of sacrifices and were domesticated by humans around the same time. And, as previously mentioned, both animals are associated with Christmas. Both goats and sheep have been represented as important gods in various mythology, but then at one point there was a shift. In Christianity, the sheep, or rather the lamb, was given positive attributes. The Lamb of God is a title for Jesus, for instance. On the other hand, in Christianity, Satan is commonly depicted as a goat or a creature with cloven hooves. Although there is no mention of a goat-looking creature in the Bible, somehow this has come to be the case. In the Bible, the snake in the Garden of Eden who persuaded Eve to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge is often tied to Satan, but there is no mention of a goat-like creature. It seems as though the idea of a goat-like creature being the devil developed later on. Pan from the Greek mythology was originally a god of the wild, shepherds, and rustic music, but due to the Christian missionaries, Pan went from a god to a demon and then to Satan himself. Even the Baphomet, known to have been worshipped by the Knights Templar, is recognized as being both a deity and a demon in different stories. Another name for the Baphomet is the Sabbatic goat, a symbolism of the equilibrium attained through opposing forces. The Sabbatic goat is half human, half animal, male and female, good and evil. Again, the Baphomet had nothing to do with Satanism, but this is now the logo for the Church of Satan. Christmas, as I mentioned earlier in the video, also has connections to goats. In the 19th century, Germanic people celebrated the Yule goat, who was a similar figure to Santa in that it was a gift bringer. They were symbolized as an ornamental goat made of straw. Another goat figure for Christmas was Krampus, the a-hole counterpart to Santa. He's got goat horns growing out, is all black, and is set to thrash chains around. Unlike the Yule goat, Krampus is clearly not the type to bring joy to people. It's weird though because Santa was kind of in on it, like they were a team. Like Santa would come into a house and be like, "Oh, hey kid, yeah, you've been good. Here, have an orange or, some dried fruits or something." But if you were bad, then you had Krampus to deal with, and he would give you what's called a birching, which is when you get whacked with a birch rod. So why is there all this hate for the goat, and why is the sheep or lamb getting all the glory? I mean, they look so similar too, and they're even considered cousins. Look! Even the fans of the One Piece live action can't decide if the Going Merry is meant to be a sheep or goat. In kanji, we see that the word sheep is written like this, and is read as hitsuji, and the kanji for goat, or yagi in Japanese, just adds the kanji for mountain in front of it. As a side note, the Japanese surname Yagi is written like this instead in kanji, meaning 8 trees. An alternative way of reading this kanji, however, is haki. Now, let's look at some connections to goats in One Piece. The star sign for the period of Christmas is Capricorn, and Oda Sensei, who was born on 1st of January, is also indeed a Capricorn. FYI, he is also born in the year of the rabbit. The first island that Luffy lands on once he sets off on his adventure is Goat Island. Sengoku, the former fleet admiral who has a goatee, also has a pet goat. We often see Sengoku hanging out with it and is seen feeding the goat paper sometimes. Oda often shows goats eating paper in chapter covers, and we also get a whole herd of goats in this chapter cover eating Whitebeard's hair, which is all just fun and games, isn't it? Or is it? You see, God, paper, and hair all have one thing in common. In Japanese, they are all written as kami. So, an animal often depicted as having evil or devilish connotations is seen eating things that have the same word for God. This reminds me of how the D clan are seen as enemies of the gods. The celestial dragons even warn their children that if they do not behave, the D would eat them up. This last bit is also interesting in that this is not so different to what parents in Japan tell their kids about Black Santa or Kuroi Santa. And now let's move on to Krampus, another Christmas figure represented by the goat. Remember when I mentioned that Krampus would punish bad kids using birch rods? Well, the birch tree in Japanese is called kaba, and what's more, a white birch that is more heavily associated to Christmas is called shirakaba. Now this is interesting because it's yet another wordplay in Japanese. Shira meaning white, and kaba meaning both birch and, wait for it, hippo. That's right, shirakaba can be referring to a white birch, but it can also be a reference to a white hippo. So this dude here represents Krampus. What's more, Wapol isn't the only hippo we see on Drum Island. We also see his pet Robson, but more importantly, we have Blackbeard being mentioned for the first time. So again, we see a character associated with the hippo who is basically an evil version of Santa, a Krampus. What's interesting though is that both characters have character designs more in line with the traditional Santa. This makes me think that Oda has done the old switcheroo and has basically designed characters that look like Santa but act like Krampus, and characters that look or is perceived to be Krampus but acts like Santa. Oh, and before I forget, Blackbeard, who probably wants to become a saint like Saint Nicholas, has a weapon with 3 claws. As I explained before, 3 is sun in Japanese. So we have Sun and Kurozu if it's in katakana, which sounds like Santa Claus.
Sandy Claus.
We also have another name that fits the same set of logic. If we keep the Kuro and Zu and say Sun in one of the alternative readings of 3, which is Mi, you get Kurozumi. Maybe these guys are distant cousins or something? I mean, they are both pretty despicable.
And man, are they ugly.
Alright, so get this. In Japanese, and kind of in English as well, Satan is Satan, Santa is Santa, and Saturn of the festival of Saturnalia is Satan. As I mentioned in a previous section of the video where I talk about the Great Kingdom, I believe that the planet of Saturn will play a big role in Joyboy's character in the endgame of One Piece. Which makes sense because Elbaf is coming up very soon. Also in Japanese, Christmas can be written as Seitansai, which is meant to mean the festival of the birth of the saint. But it actually sounds like it means the holy birth of Satan as well. We already know that slavery and freedom is a major theme in One Piece. We see aspects of this on almost every island that Luffy and his nakama visit. Now, let's talk about the dark history of the spirit of pirates known as rum. But in order to talk about rum, we must first talk about sugarcane. You see, slaves were what drove the sugarcane industry. The Portuguese enslaved Africans in plantations and became the world's largest sugar exporter by the 16th century. The slaves were forced to plant, fertilize, grow, and transport the sugar canes. They also extracted the juices from the canes by crushing them and boiling it to create crystallized sugar. Through this process, a byproduct called molasses was created. Fermented molasses was enjoyed by the slaves and the poor as sweeteners, and eventually someone distilled this fermented molasses, and thus rum was born. By the 17th century, the rum trade began in the New England colonies. The rum trade became part of a triangular trade between Britain, the Caribbean, and Africa. In this triangular trade, rum was sent from Britain to Africa. There, rum was traded for slaves, who were then sent from Africa to the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, the slaves worked in the plantations to grow and process more sugar canes. From the Caribbean, sugar and molasses was then transported to Britain, where they distilled more rum. More rum would then go to Africa to be traded for more slaves, thus creating an endless spiral of true evil, a looping current like the Tarai current. So, the question becomes, if Joyboy, the warrior of liberation, lived on Enies Lobby, but Enies Lobby is one of the points of the Tarai currents, which metaphorically fits with a triangular trade, a dark stain on human history, how does that make sense narratively? I think personally, it could be resolved in any number of ways, but I think also part of the excitement of One Piece is the mysteries. So if we go ahead and reveal all of them before Oda gets his chance, that would only be ruining the story for some people. Now, is that a bit of an excuse because I can't find concrete proof to solve this question? Yes. Moving swiftly on. We also see slavery in the history of Christmas. During the time of legal slavery in the United States, Christmas was the only time of the year when slaves were given an extended break. The slaves celebrated with food, music, and dancing. Some slaves even used this extended break as an opportunity to escape. Saturnalia, an ancient Roman festival and one of the predecessors to Christmas, was celebrated in honor of the god Saturn. In Roman mythology, Saturn was the god of agriculture who reigned over the world in the Golden Age. Saturnalia was a celebration of banquets, gift-giving, and partying. Gambling was also allowed, where the roles of the master and slaves were apparently reversed in some cases. Some stories say that the slaves were treated to a banquet. Some stories say that they feasted together, and some stories even say the masters were the ones to serve the food to the slaves. The slaves were apparently even allowed to disrespect their masters without punishment. So, for the duration of the festival, slaves were given a small hope of equality and freedom of speech, debatably a cruel tradition to give hope and then to take it away from them every single year. Since if freedom can be so easily taken from you, is that truly freedom? Now for something a little different. In the One Piece world, have you ever noticed that Oda places mushrooms in strange places around the story? They often feel like they are suggesting something deeper, but it never really gets explained further. And Drum Island, for some reason, has the most references to mushroom. For starters, did you know that mushrooms have something to do with Christmas? Lapland, a real location in our world and the northernmost region of Finland, has been connected to the legend of the North Pole, the home of Santa. It is in Lapland that we get a bizarre connection of mushrooms and Christmas. So, the Arctic shamans of Lapland, who had deep connections with reindeers, used to go down people's chimneys and hand out toxic but psychedelic mushrooms called Amanita muscaria. The shamans even dressed in red with white dots like mushrooms and rode on reindeer-drawn sleds. I guess it was a form of escapism too, since the winter times in the past was difficult for many cultures. Interestingly, reindeers, especially the male ones, also like to eat Amanita muscaria, and one of the effects of the Amanita muscaria is that it makes you feel like you're flying, hence its other word, the fly Amanita. Perhaps this is where the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer came from. I wonder if Chopper will get a final form that allows him to fly like Dumbo, except instead of massive ears, he gets like these massive horns. Does that sound stupid? Yeah, I think that's stupid. There's also a theory tying mushrooms to how people put gifts under evergreen trees, all wrapped up in red and white. In fact, in nature we see mushrooms growing under trees in similar positions to where gifts would be, so people think that maybe it's not just a coincidence. Finally, have you noticed that the formation of the drum rockies is kinda weird? Like, it looks really unnatural and certainly doesn't look like mountain formations, until you do this. Now it makes a lot more sense why we're seeing random mushrooms everywhere in the arc. Maybe in the past, Drum Island was even an autumn island, since the oldest living person there is Dr. Kureha, which means maple leaf. We even see that Drum Kingdom, which is a winter island, is now renamed as the Sakura Kingdom, a kingdom now representing spring. It seems only natural that it could have been an autumn island if you think about it like this. I actually think that Drum Island played a huge part in the Void Century, especially if Joyboy's name ends up being NERONA D. It would actually also make more sense based on Luffy's first reaction to the island, where he was actually moved to tears. I can't actually remember if he has ever done it before for another island, and also when he reaches the castle atop the mountain, he is simply in awe. Again, a reaction that I'm not sure that I've ever seen from him. It makes me wonder if Lamu at one point lived on Drum Kingdom and the island was liberated by him, and maybe the castle was perhaps built in his honor, like the Great Naruto Bridge in Naruto. There is definitely something going on there, but I don't have quite enough to go off of just yet. Since One Piece is a story written by a Japanese author, it makes sense to look at how Christmas is celebrated differently in Japan, right? And let me just tell you, I found the most ridiculous clue that ties into the endgame of One Piece through my research here. Christmas became more widespread when Japan reopened its borders to the west in the Meiji period. In Japan, Christmas is often considered the Japanese Valentine's. It is the most romantic day of the year to be with your partner. The entire country lights up on Christmas. Shopping malls, restaurants, and the streets are all lit up with Christmas lights. These lights are called illumination in Japanese, or illumination if you will. A word that I definitely thought could be an alternative name to the Great Imagination Kingdom, but instead it could be the Great Illumination Kingdom. Another common thing to do on Christmas in Japan is to go to Tokyo Disneyland, where they have fireworks, special merch, candy giveaways, special Christmas menus, and a parade. There is also, of course, the Black Santa that I previously talked about, who is basically the Japanese version of Krampus. Now, I think you're going to like this next one. So I talked earlier about how I believe that the devil fruits were the gifts that Lamu gave to the people, right? Well, let me tell you what Japanese people traditionally wrapped their gifts in. It was the furoshiki. Furoshiki wrapping cloths are actually making a comeback in these eco-friendly times since it's reusable and looks really nice. But traditionally, Japanese people used furoshiki wrapping cloths for multiple purposes, like to wrap and transport goods like a bag and to present less formal gifts. Furoshiki cloths came in many different patterns and colors which all symbolize different things. In One Piece, we have actually seen furoshiki of a certain pattern being used a bunch of times. This pattern has the meaning of longevity, fertility, family, and prosperity. The origins of this pattern can even be traced back to ancient Egypt from where it came to Japan via the Silk Road. And the legend goes like this. A thief broke into a house empty-handed and looked for something to wrap and transport the stolen goods in. Since then, this pattern has been associated with thieves and stolen goods. And the name of this pattern and what it looks like is this, the arabesque pattern, which in Japanese is arabesque. So, where have we seen this pattern before in this story? Well, as I mentioned, Oda Sensei has been showing us the arabesque patterned furoshiki to show thieving many times in the panels. But we've also seen this spiral time and time again to show ominous situation. And of course it is always associated with the patterns found on every single devil fruits. Oda has been telling us from the very start that devil fruits are not a curse or something to be feared. It is a gift. And how fitting that the furoshiki pattern that Oda has picked represents thieves. After all, what would a pirate be without stealing? A couple things to add here is of course that arabesque in Japanese, arabesque, sounds suspiciously similar to arabasta or alabaster, which makes sense since the legend of the pattern goes back to ancient Egypt. Another thing to note, as I mentioned earlier, is that every color used in furoshiki designs has a meaning. Purple, for instance, which is the color of Luffy and Blackbeard's fruit, represents high rank and longevity. Now, when I said that I found one of the biggest clues when doing research for Christmas in Japan, I wasn't even talking about the furoshiki. I've got something even bigger. This next section may be the most important link that I have found to One Piece, so pay close attention. Ode to Joy is the final movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, completed in 1824, 3 years before his passing. To the rest of the world, it is known as Beethoven's masterpiece, and is even the national anthem of the EU. An incredibly powerful piece which revolutionized music by adding a choir to sing Schiller's poem in the final piece. It was the first symphony to incorporate vocal soloists and chorus, which was previously a purely instrumental genre. The GOAT even managed to write his best piece when he was completely deaf. In Japan, Ode to Joy has a slightly different meaning. Ode to Joy is considered a Christmas carol and may even be the most important Christmas song to the Japanese. So important that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is nicknamed Daiku, meaning the ninth. It is sung every December all across the nation. The most impressive public performance is a 10,000 person choir singing the German song at the Suntory 10,000 Freude event in Osaka-jo. But why is Ode to Joy such an integral part of Christmas in Japan? To answer this, we have to go back to 1918 during World War I. Japan had allied with the British and had captured troops from the German-occupied Chinese island of Qingdao. The 1,000 German soldiers were taken to Naruto on the island of Shikoku. The POW camp there had commanding officers who encouraged captured soldiers to participate in various activities including playing music. On June 1st, 1918, a 45-person orchestra and an 80-person choir performed the Ninth Symphony for the first time in Japan. The wealthy folks who heard about the performance visited the camp a little while later for an encore, and this event is what led to the 10,000 strong performance all those years later. Just as a side note though, it's interesting that both Oda Sensei and Kishimoto Sensei decided to take heavy inspiration from this event. They both wanted to call their characters Naruto, the name of the city where they had POWs that look like the characters. Is it just me or is that kind of weird? Although Oda has gone on to say Sanji is French, so maybe he's slightly off the hook. The more you think about it too though, it's interesting the fascination that Japanese people seem to have to the Germans. Perhaps Ohara will have a few things to say on the matter? Bye. Post-World War II, during the US-led occupation, traditional Japanese music, even including kabuki, was censored. What wasn't censored though was Beethoven's Ode to Joy. In December 1946 in Japan, conductor Joseph Rosenstock performed Ode to Joy to the Japanese people who were trying to recover from the destruction of war. For the people of Japan, the song is about survival. It's a piece about healing and a piece that allows them to pick themselves back up, step forward and rebuild. Now, the original message of Ode to Joy is widely agreed upon as this: the triumph of universal brotherhood against war and desperation. It is one of hope that one day all people will become siblings. Wait, rewind? Did you hear it correctly? Yeah, you did, but that would mean...
Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah, not that.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Brotherhood. All people will become siblings? I believe this. In this panel, Luffy says, okay, my turn, I'm gonna, and then he goes on to say, become siblings with all the people in the world. See, his goal of becoming the Pirate King is so that he would have enough freedom to be able to achieve this goal. At first, it sounds like a ridiculous thought, a child's nonsense, but in a world with discrimination and segregation, wars, slavery, and tyrannical rulers, this becomes a powerful thought. This is why Luffy must at least become the Pirate King to achieve his dream. It is a goal about peace, since after all, we are all one people. And also, for people who have suffered through terrible treatment from their blood relatives and wish they'd never been born to it, this idea becomes salvation. To know that all people, no matter how alone they may feel, can find connections and ties somewhere out there and become siblings without being connected by blood, because after all, we are all people who live under the same sun. And what does Ace do after hearing Luffy's goal? He teaches Luffy the method in which to do this. You must simply have a ceremony of Brotherhood Sakazuki with the people you want to be siblings with. So, that's what Luffy will do. Not a parent-child Sakazuki or a follower Sakazuki, but one of equal standing, a Brotherhood Sakazuki, with all the races and people of the world. This is why Oda claims time and time again that there will never be any Romans in the crew. They are his nakama, and to him, nakama means family.
Ohana means family.
Bottom line, Luffy sees his crew as his siblings. He doesn't really see people as being above or beneath him. He has always connected with people as if they were his siblings, because siblings will laugh and cry together, fight together and fight one another, forgive one another, and grow stronger together. Sometimes you aspire to be like your older siblings, and sometimes you're there to teach and inspire your younger siblings. Luffy has treated all people this way, regardless of whatever form these people come in. So there, it's settled, alright? No blimmin' romances on the ship. Seriously, you shippers out there need to chill out now. Unless, you're into that kind of stuff, which, no judgment. Now, a final thing on Ode to Joy. One of the reasons that Ode to Joy is so important is that in 1989, Leonard Bernstein conducted the piece in East Berlin to celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was broadcasted worldwide to an audience of 100 million. What's also insane is that Bernstein also replaced the words joy in the lyrics to freedom. Like, how much more fitting does Ode to Joy need to be to Joyboy, the drums of liberation, the foreshadowed fall of the Red Line, and the One Piece? I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the anime version plays Ode to Joy to the fall of the Red Line. It also wouldn't be far-fetched, since Ode to Joy has been used in plenty of anime before, such as Neon Genesis, Read or Die, Gunslinger Girl, and Inuyasha. It's also quite beautiful if you think about it. The story of One Piece takes inspiration from history and mythology, religions, science, and the arts, all the while not discriminating who or where the source material is from. It's the culmination of all of human culture that Oda has weaved into this one story. It's as if Oda is trying to embody the message of Ode to Joy through his own masterpiece. And through its success in its manga, anime, and even the live action forms, One Piece has actually brought people around the world together as nakama, while reminding all of us to be a positive influence on the world like Luffy. And is Oda kind of creating world peace in his own Oda kind of way? So what do you think? Does Ode to Joy, the Ninth Symphony, feel like it truly speaks to the core of what One Piece is about? No? Well, does it help if I tell you that the ninth member of the Straw Hats was Brook, our resident musician? Still a no? Okay, well, I guess I can't win them all. For this final section of the video, I would like to further explain Lamu, my headcanon version of Joyboy from the Void Century. I'll also explain the meaning of the D, then once I've done that, I will end it with some fun quick theories / predictions. So here, I have done an illustration of Lamu, the other members of the Vikings / Six Kings, and the three great kings, Poseidon, Pluton, and Uranus. I also could have included other key members who I believe would have been part of the alliance, but I ran out of time and patience to do that, so let me know if you want me to do the rest of the characters, and maybe I'll get onto that at some point. But let's just focus on Lamu for now. Here's a recap from everything I've talked about so far. Lamu was a giant with a mix of other races including the Jovians. Lamu and his brothers, Taimu and Emu, were slaves from a young age. Lamu is a pun on these words, and combined with the initial D, he becomes Doramu, as in the drums of liberation. He was King Saturn of the Vikings, and he was also the king of the Great Imagination. In other words, Lamu was Santa, who ruled over the North Pole. So let me get into some details. So if Lamu's name is a pun on lamb, shouldn't he have ram horns and white hair? So you see, I actually think that would be quite boring and would end up with a character that doesn't play with the concept of what is good or evil. I think that by giving him a bull horn instead and giving him a scar to resemble the Baphomet, he becomes a far more interesting character, especially if he's meant to represent Santa. All that red and demonic vibes, which I also pulled from the descriptions of Krampus and the Devil, would also, I think, contrast really well with when he is in his awakened form and looking more godlike. Plus, I really wanted to give him a bullhorn because that feels more like a shonen manga character, and because of all the references to bulls and their connections to Luffy in the story. And in case you don't know, Luffy's star sign is Taurus. Also, I believe that Lamu's three brothers will have different mix of attributes drawing from lambs, goats, and bulls. So, for example, Taimu will have the body of a bull like Blackbeard, but the horns of a ram. Lamu has the name of a lamb, or a ram, but has the horns of a bull. And his D-clan is seen as the enemies of the gods, which I previously tied to goats. Emu has the calmness of a lamb, the horns of a goat, but maybe is easy to see red, like a bull. On a side note, a goat's horn continues to grow all their life. If Emu has lived a stupidly long time, and he has goat horns, would the reason he has such a tall hat be because that's how long his horns actually are? So, why rum? To which I say, why not rum? And this question actually goes out to Oda Sensei. Oda-sensei, why don't you show rum more frequently in the story? After all, One Piece is a pirate story with heavy ties to sake and to themes of slavery. It would only be fitting to have the spirit most heavily tied to pirates and slavery be a common guest in the story, wouldn't you say? The first time we see the mention of rum is on Drum Island. Dr. Kureha first talks about it just in passing. We then see Chopper reference it in the form of Rumble Ball or Ramburuboru. The next time we see it, as far as I can tell, is in the anime only, when Blackbeard is seen holding it in Mocktown during that iconic scene. But that's kind of it. I don't really think rum gets mentioned all that much. Like maybe not even ever again in the 1,000+ chapters of the story. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, because oh wait, I'm wrong. Yeah, the Rumba Pirates is another one. And then there's also Frankie. His real name is Kati Flam, which in Japanese is Kati Furamu. See, the word rum is in his name. And if you join Kati and Fu, you get Katifu. And Katifu, or more accurately, Qatif, is an area in Saudi Arabia which for centuries was the most important trade port in Eastern Arabia. They are also known to have a huge jungle of palm trees there, an emblem that Frankie is totally rocking. So other than that, there's no other mentions of rum? Maybe? But the point is, the reference to rum seems like something Oda is holding out for. I mean, he is a king of puns, which makes me think that the character of Joyboy is what he has been holding out for. And on the topic of holding out, Oda has talked about how he doesn't want to draw pirates with an eye patch because he wants to show that pirates don't all look like that. But he's also stated that there will be a pirate with an eye patch in the endgame of the story. Who better than Joyboy for this? And eye patches goes back to Odin, the Norse god. Interestingly, Odin lost his eye in the pursuit of wisdom. He sacrificed his eye in order to drink from the well of knowledge. Odin also has associations to Christmas. In Germany, they worship the god during the winter holidays as a Santa-like figure. And in case you're wondering, the design of the eye patch here is called the Eye of the Tao. It is a symbol of the island of Lamu. I've mentioned this island a few times in this video already, but Lamu is an island off the shores of Kenya. It is also a UNESCO site due to its cultural significance. Since the island was visited by many traders, sailors and travelers during its early years, the island became incredibly diverse. The island's prosperity is also credited to their slave trade. Now the symbol, the Eye of the Tao, with the crescent moon resembling an eye and a star above it, was originally used by the navigators who engraved this symbol on their marine vessels. Nowadays it is a symbol of Lamu Island and is seen everywhere on the island. The symbol apparently originated from over 2,000 years ago. Their ancestors mostly specialized in boat making and came up with this design. To their ancestors, it was a guiding spirit in the waters. The symbol is also relevant in that before the invention of the compass, people relied on the moon and the stars for navigation. So that's why I included the Eye of the Tao into Lamu's eye patch. It just felt like it worked and I liked it. Plus, it looks like the simplified version of the Whitebeard Pirate's Jolly Roger that's actually seen on Marco's chest. And since we're talking about doodles on chests, let's talk about the symbol on Lamu's chest. So this is a symbol that I think is pronounced Do, which I believe is the original reading of the initial D. So what makes me say this? Alright, so buckle up. In order to explain that, I first need to quickly explain how I appointed the other characters in this illustration to their different titles. But because I don't want to go through and explain all of that in words, because this video is already way too long, I will put up this graphic right here to broadly explain my rationales. You can pause the video now to take a look if you want. Alright, so assuming that you've already taken a good look at the graphics now, this is what I'm thinking. So the fishmen of Mercury, the water planet, the Lunarians of Mars, the fire planet, have references to elemental powers. We also see here that the minks have Electro, the elemental power of electricity, and Birkins with their large wings is the elemental power of the wind. By this logic, giants of Saturn, the ground planet, should also have a reference to an element of ground. Now, am I suggesting that giants can earthbend? No. I think it's more of a reference to their might as in their earth-shattering strength. Saturn is also the second largest planet after Jupiter, so fitting too that giants are the second largest race in the One Piece world after ancient giants. Lamu being King Saturn also makes sense to me because Saturnalia is a Christmas celebration, which leads me back to the symbol on Lamu's chest. I believe that this symbol represents the sound of Do, which represents the giant's home planet of Saturn, or Dose in Japanese. Now, am I trying to say that this symbol looks like Saturn with its rings? Well, that's just a happy accident, but let me explain. Let's look at music, one of the key themes of One Piece. Do you know the song from The Sound of Music called Do Re Mi?
来てたら言ってくれビファサラシド
It's a fun wee song, also popular in Japan by the way, which basically teaches kids how to read and sing musical notes. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do are the syllables assigned to each note of the musical scale C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. A syllabic approach is used in singing since the syllables are easier to sing than the letters. So the syllable of do is assigned to the note of C, the first note of the musical scale. And now if we look at the whole note of C, this is what you see. So this is where I have gotten the design for Lamu's tattoo, a musical symbol with the syllable of do, which is the note of the C, a syllable which means ground in kanji. And of course it's a happy accident that the symbol literally looks like a man wearing a straw hat and also looks like the planet of Saturn, the ground planet. Do, also written as a different kanji, can be written like this, meaning path. This is used in the word for martial arts, budo, and it's also used in the words of various martial arts like judo and aikido. If you're a fan of Naruto, Naruto often talks about his ninja way, which is nindo in Japanese. Dawado Ichimonji, meaning straight line through the path of harmony, and Zoro's treasured sword also has a do kanji meaning path. So, is that it? After all these years, that's what we get. Doesn't really have the impact or romanticism of some of the other theories out there like the dawn of the world or the dawn of the drums. But here's the thing, I only said that that's how the D should be read as. Reading the D as do doesn't limit what the D symbolizes. So being King Saturn is how Lamu got his initial, but to him, the D could personally symbolize dawn or even drum. Even in the Do Re Mi song, the lyric states that do stands for do, a female deer. But in the Japanese lyrics, which are all different by the way, the do stands for donuts. And if we look at the illustration and the characters, to Amatsuki D Kitsu, the D is doki, as in doki doki, the sound of a heart beating fast. For Trafalgar D Water, the D is guard, as in guard and protect. For Nefertari D Lily, the D is to lead, read, or reed. A reed is a weaving material used by the ancient Egyptians and also a type of instrument. For Goldie Bird, its name in Japanese becomes Goldobado or Gold Bird as in the phoenix. And for Jaguar D Atlas, its name in Japanese becomes Haguwarudo Atlas, Hug World Atlas. But wait, if the D is meant to be read as a do, why did Oda correct this multiple times in the story? Like, didn't Dr. Kureha say that Gold Roger's name is read as Goldie Roger? Even Roger himself is seen correcting his name as Goldie Roger, not Gold Roger or Gordo Roger in Japanese. And this is after he learnt the meaning of the D. Well, Dr. Kureha simply stated that Roger's given name was Goldie Roger because she knows about the will of D, and she knew his original name before he was crowned the King of Pirates and the world changed his name to Gold Roger. And as for Roger, even if the D can be read as Do, his name would still be Gordo Roger, not Gordo Roger. I also think that gold wasn't the most important thing to him, so the D combined with the gold probably didn't hit home for him. However, what if it was written as Goru Doroja? This would read as the goal is mud, or the goal is a mud jar. Could this be Oda hinting to us that the treasure left on Laugh-Tale is not gold, but it is an earthen vase holding a certain sake perhaps? Or vase? Vase, I don't know, I've been talking too long. It's also quite funny if any of this is true, since it was probably the world government who was involved in changing or hiding the D in Roger's name before the papers crowned him the King of the Pirates, Gordo Roger, or Gold Roger. But by doing so, they revealed the true reading of the D. But you know what? What does the D mean to you? Because I believe that this was all a social experiment conducted by Oda on you and I, the fans. He was giving us the greatest gift, the ability and freedom of the imagination. Because look, we have been trying to figure this out for the last 20 years, stretching our minds and our imaginations in every possible way to try to come up with the answer. And we have come up with many answers, but we also have answers that resonate the most with us, and that is the true essence of the D. The freedom to seek our own path, the door, and to come to our own answers. Because you see, if you think about it, having the D mean just one thing actually goes against freedom. We should all be given the freedom to choose and imagine our own personal meanings for a symbol. The same symbol for one person will not necessarily mean the same thing for another person. So in that sense, the D is a symbol of freedom. So the will of D is the will of those who strive for their own sense of freedom. So let me know what you think. I like it personally because it really resonates with what One Piece means to me. Alright, so let's get into some quick theories and predictions to finally end the video with. So we have had film gold and film red, the colors of Christmas. So there will be a film white, perhaps the final film which will cover Joyboy's adventures. There may even be a film green. This will focus on Zoro's character development and ancestry in full detail since we missed out on that in the Wano arc. But I'm not sure if Oda would be willing to do this because we would never be hearing the end of it from Sanji fans. The story will end after 12 sagas, like the 12 days of Christmas or the 12 months of the year that end with December, since after all we currently have 11 sagas. In our world, kings are historically crowned on Christmas days. Luffy in One Piece will be crowned Pirate King on a day that represents Christmas. Winter is coming. The Void Century in Japanese is Kuhaku no Hyakunen, literally translating to 100 years of white sky, which could be referring to 100 years of winter and snow during the Void Century. The Straw Hat Pirates got their official start in Syrup Village when they acquired their Jolly Roger and going merry. What if their journey ends in Laughtail drinking Binks' sake from Amasu? This would be funny because the phrase Merry Christmasu also starts with merry and ends with a masu. What's a masu, you ask? Well, a masu is a cubic wooden cup originally used for measuring rice. It is used to drink sake out of on special occasions like birthdays, anniversaries, and weddings. Perhaps this particular masu will be made from the wood of the treasure tree Adam, which could hold memories of the Void Century. By drinking Binks' sake from this masu, maybe it allows you to see what happened during the Void Century as if you were truly there. There will be a giant called Yururu in Japanese. We have already seen Joru and Jaru, the legendary co-captains of the giant warrior pirates. Their names in Japanese is Yoruru and Yaruru. I find it only fitting that there would be a giant called Yururu. Yururu of course being a wordplay on Yule, the Germanic version of Christmas. Luffy will lose an eye to gain wisdom like the Norse god Odin and Lamu. Luffy will also be immortalized in some way by the end of the story, but not necessarily become immortal. Unlike Luffy, who looked up to the giants and liked to gigantify himself using his abilities, Joyboy preferred to make himself smaller to connect with other people. If we are to say that the mixing of cultures and races is what makes people and a nation stronger, we can also agree that the hybrid form of a Zoan is the strongest form. So the question becomes, will Luffy's hybrid form become Gear 6? The form that will visually mix Gear 4 and Gear 5, the dark and the light? Since we are saying that the story is about imagination and make-believe, will we eventually see figures like the Sandman, the Easter Bunny, and leprechauns too? Luffy is the second coming of Joyboy. If Blackbeard is the second or third coming of Taimu, the god of time, will Blackbeard gain dominion over time by utilizing the different devil fruits that he acquires? Now next, I'm actually going to give you a couple of bonus theories that aren't all that related to Christmas, but I'm just going to throw it in there. Now let's start off with a couple that are short and sweet. Frankie is a 7th Vegapunk satellite who's been offlined. We did find him on Water 7, and both Vegapunk and Frankie have the star symbols on them and rock the Hawaiian shirts. Joyboy will have such an incredible future sight that it allows him to kind of have a conversation with people in the present time through the use of a pre-recorded tone dial. And now here's me hoping that we get to see a broken conversation between Lamu and Luffy on Laughtail. Now the next theory is about who Binks was. So Binks was a mink. Stay with me, here's my logic. Binks, also spelt with an X sometimes, is the name of the monkey actor, the white-headed capuchin monkey that was in George of the Jungle, Bruce Almighty, and Ace Ventura. Here we can see Jim Carrey's actor Ace with his trusty psychic Spike, played by Binks. And in case you're wondering, capuchin monkeys in Japanese is omakizaru. So, Binks was of the Minks, which has to be true because it rhymes. His full name was Monkey D. Binks. So Luffy, Dragon, and Garp belongs to a family that goes all the way back to a monkey mink. And monkey brew or saruzake is alcohol that is made in nature in the hole of a tree, for example. When fruits get into this hole and it ferments, it becomes saruzake. It is said that the fruits were left in the hole by monkeys, hence the name monkey brew or saruzake. In Zor, the monkey mink Monji produced the saruzake from the native fruits of Zor. I believe that Binks' sake was a saruzake made from devil fruits and contained the collective memories of the Void Century. Furthermore, Luffy's ancestor was the king of the minks, a monkey king in the true meaning of the word. And so this attack here actually maybe could have been an advanced form of an electro. And in case you're wondering what the D meant for Monkey D. Binks, it was dobing, which translates to earthenware teapot or earthen bottle. So we have Roger, who may be telling us that the goal is a mud jar, And then we also have Binks, the man who made Binks' sake and who has earthen bottle in his name. Which leads us to, now that we know who Binks was, we can actually trace the Monkey D lineage forward to a member that some people are curious about, which is Luffy's mum. So I'm sure that some people are getting excited with the idea of Crocomum, since, crocodile is an animal, which means that it would fit with the mink lineage theory, right? Wrong! The word mink is a reference to fur, and all minks are furry mammals. Now let's figure out what we already know about the Monkey D clan, and what we think we know based on the previous Binks theory. So, number 1, all Monkey D members are based on animals. Garp is a dog, Dragon, a dragon, shocker, and Luffy is most associated to an ox, besides a monkey. It is his star sign, and as previously mentioned, he's often making connections with various cow, bulls, and oxes in the story. Number 2, this one's confusing, so listen up. For the same reason that crocodile can't be a monkey, dragon is also not a monkey. Garp has the blood of a mink, so is represented by a furry animal, the dog. Garp's biological child, who would become one of Luffy's parents, has to also be represented by a furry animal to be of the mink lineage. This cancels out Dragon, since he is represented by a reptilian creature. Dragon does not have mink in him, and would have had to marry into the Monkey D family, and which makes Dragon the son-in-law to Garp. By process of elimination, this leaves Luffy's mum to be the only possible answer, and she is the biological daughter of Garp, and is the one with the mink lineage, and she will be represented by a furry animal. I would say that these animals are based on the Chinese zodiac symbol. It's the most likely place that Oda would have taken inspiration from, since a lot of manga artists do the same thing. And so when we look at the Chinese zodiac chart, we see that we do indeed have a dog, an ox, and a dragon. And then you also immediately notice that these 3 animals are evenly spaced apart. Follow this pattern and go 3 spaces over from the dragon, and lo and behold, you get the goat/sheep. And I say goat/sheep because in the Chinese zodiac, it can actually be either or. Oh, and what do you know? It's also the animal we've been talking about so much in this video already. It's the same animal as Oda's Western zodiac, the Capricorn, and the goat sheep also makes a nice cross with the 4 animals. They are all of the ground element, as categorized in the Chinese zodiac. More specifically, the dog and the dragon are yang polarity, and the ox and the goat sheep are yin polarity. Now in terms of Luffy's mum's name, let's say it's something like Monkey D Capra, Capra meaning nanny goat. It has a nice ring to it and it ends in Ra, which is relevant because Zoro's mum Terra and Sanji's mum Sora all end in Ra. Now what does she look like and when will she appear in the story? No idea. It was just a quick train of thought that popped up while I was writing the Binks theory actually, which also just popped up while I was writing another theory. So this is why it's taken so long to complete the script. It's honestly the most I've ever written because I generally just don't write. And it was ridiculous because more dots just keep being connected the longer I spent on it. It's been exhausting. Anyway, but now I'm done. Let's get this bad boy all wrapped up with a neat bow. So I know that this video has been heavy on the wordplays, but that's the thing about the Japanese culture. They really do love their wordplays, and it is also a fundamental part of their language. But in a story like One Piece with over 1,000 chapters, you're bound to see intentional connections given to us by Oda, but you're also going to see misleading connections, or misconnections I suppose, that weren't intended by Oda. Take the Japanese version of the phrase Merry Christmas for example. We've already mentioned how it could be a wordplay on Merry, Kuri, and Masu, but it could also easily be me, disu, riku, mesu, riku, susu, kuma, mame. Unless you're Oda himself with the grand vision of the story, you are not always going to know what connections are real or just an illusion. Which is why when we're coming up with these theories, we have to be extra careful to try to pick out the intentional connections from the misleading connections. Also, I know that some of the theories I have brought up in this video are not exactly new. But see, that's the great thing about it, because now I'm giving you another reason for how these amazing theories from the community are potentially true, and also because these different theories could all connect together within the theory of Christmas. I'm also looking forward to what new theories will be born from the ideas presented in this video. And I'm not saying, for instance, that Shanks' name referencing Christmas ham will somehow tie into the story. No, it's more that if we know that Oda is looking at Christmas for inspiration for his story, then we can follow the train of thought and get to answers like the Ode to Joy. It allows us to dissect the story while having both eyes open. So the question is this: has Oda Sensei, or Goda, or Oat, really been writing a story about Christmas this whole time? And has he been leaving clues for us everywhere in the story from the very beginning of the story? Or am I just bat poop insane? And is all of this a bit too much of a stretch? Maybe you're thinking, yeah, I guess these things could happen over my dead body. There's no chance this theory could be real. Not in a million years, no way in hell. Seriously, when pigs fly, that chance. But look, I believe that once in a blue moon, we come across an idea so insane that it might just be brilliant, and I'm really hoping that you believe that this is one of those times. At the end of the day, it's up to the individual, whatever they want to believe. We should always leave it up to the individuals to choose their own path. We can't get upset at people for choosing a different path from ones that we wanted them to. Either way, I would love to hear your thoughts on this video, so please let me know in the comments below, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching till the end.
No, really. Thank you.
If you did enjoy this video, please like and share the video. I have more theories that I'm thinking of doing, including the origins of Nika, the relationship between Joyboy and Lily, and so much more. So if you're curious at all, subscribe and turn on notifications. Finally, I will leave you with one final piece of evidence that when I came across it, genuinely made me laugh. Now, would you like to take a guess at the release date of the first ever volume of One Piece in Japan? Well, the release date for the first ever volume of One Piece in Japan was 24th of December, Christmas Eve, 1997. The volume titled Romance Dawn was literally released on Christmas Eve. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out.
But that was interesting. Most interesting garbage I ever. Hey!